guys, wanted to go ahead and just do a random video here, but I got a comment asking whether I could basically go over the benefits of frequency responses and measurements and things like that, rather than me talking about the limits, and to go from there. So I thought I'd give it a shot and tell you my 2 cents. The truth is I actually do look at measurements to get a sense of, and it actually can save you a lot of money, and I'll kind of elaborate based on some of the information you can get from here, right? So in this case, one of the first things I usually like to do is I like to look at IEMs I don't like historically, and I like to see how they map in terms of frequency response. So what I've come to realize is that, at least for me, I didn't like the Super Mix 4. And the Super Mix 4, it maps really close to the Harman 2019 target. What I find is that here, it just feels like the vocals are a little bit thinner, right? It's just something that's a little bit carved out here. And so this isn't quite my cup of tea. So there's that. Another one is the Supernova. The Truthier Nova. It kind of maps pretty similar to that, that Harman 2019 sort of curve, but also it does feel like something is carved out here. So at least for me, it doesn't quite work for the music that I like. Another IEM is kind of like the Binary Acoustics Chopin. Now, while it's not exactly 2019, there is still that issue where it's a little thin right here. And the interesting thing is it actually correlates. Like when I realized I didn't like this, it kind of made sense that another IEM I didn't like as well either. So in this case, the In Awakened Twilight, it has some of the same flaws of the Chopin, which for me, it wasn't my cup of tea, right? So another thing I don't like is actually, I'm very sensitive to the 6 to 8K range, right? And so what I do is I actually use the Jussier Defiant as a threshold. I kind of look at the Jussier Defiant as like, it's just right in the cusp of being uncomfortable, but it's still okay. But anything that is more peakier than the Defiant, that's a big red flag, right? So sure enough, the 7Hz G1, that was a lot more peakier than the Defiant, right? But this information, when I start seeing any other IEMs where the 6 to 8K range is much, much higher than the Defiant, that actually usually gives me a little bit of a red flag, right? This is another thing I kind of want to show here, right? So when I look through here, I'm going over the Moondrop Blessing 3, the Jussier Defiant, the Tantrum Origin, the Truthier Nova, the Kiwi Ear Astral. When I do this and I crank it up around here, around the 6 to 8K range, what's that right there? That is the Moondrop Blessing 3. So the Moondrop Blessing 3 is like, I really, really hated that IEM, right? To me, it was like very shouty and very sibilant. Right there, I'm extremely sensitive to this particular range. But the funny thing is, now, provided this graph is correct, Mark from Super Reviews, he reviewed the Campfire Audio Chimera.
Believe it or not, but I actually really like Campfire Audio. I know I don't review a lot of their IEM.
This IEM is $7,500, but by just looking at the graphs, I can already tell, like, I probably wouldn't like this IEM. Because if I look right here, what am I seeing? This is the Jussier Defiant. Look at how much of a peak that is from there to there. That's going to be pretty peaky. But what I also don't like is look at that big carved out area right here. That means those mids are basically carved out. So by just looking at the graphs, I saved myself $7,500. I don't need to buy this IEM. It doesn't, at least for me, I wouldn't like this IEM. It doesn't work. Now, someone else may like this. Someone else may like this big peak here. Someone else may like that big dip down there. And that's perfect for them. But for me, I know right off the bat, I wouldn't like this, right? The other, and again, kind of on that notion, I don't need to buy the Volaire, because it's kind of like, while it doesn't exactly graph the same, it is really similar to kind of like that Harman 2019 target, which I don't like. Another is in this case, the Tantrum Soda. The Tantrum Soda, in my opinion, is actually a double whammy. It's actually a triple whammy, and I'll talk about it. First of all, when we look at the peaks right here from 6 to 8K, this is peakier than the Moondrop Blessing 3. That's bad. The second thing is, this is pretty much like, this is the Harman 2019 curve, like pretty much really, really, really similar. I'm just like, no way, dude. You know what I mean? It's a double whammy. I don't think I would like this IEM, and that's why I don't need to spend $300 on this IEM. Okay. So now what I want to do is to talk about IEMs where they seem to map the same or tell a story, but sometimes there's more to the story, right? And I learned this firsthand with the Tongzi Warner Red Lion. So when I looked at the graphs, I was thinking, well, it just seems like it's going to be the Warner 2 with more bass, and basically right here, it's going to be a little bit less peaky compared to the Warner 2, right? And I'm like, I don't really need to buy that. But the interesting thing is when I actually bought this in person, yes, it did have more bass, but this is actually a far, far better IEM than the 1 or 2. And I actually go over this in much more detail in my review. It's not redundant, even though it seems like it would be redundant. The other one I want to talk about is the Lecture Cadenza 4 versus the Software Studio 4. These look similar on graphs, but they sound nothing alike in person. Like when I listen to these in person, they don't sound anything alike. They are extremely different. The other thing I want to talk about is the Dunakima 2 versus the Tantrum Origin. Now, to be fair, now that I'm actually, this is tilted quite a bit warmer here. It's tilted warmer, but this is actually the degree in the differences between the Tantrum Origin and the Dunakima 2 is pretty tremendous, because the Tantrum Origin is undoubtedly a bright IEM, but the Dunakima 2 is very warm. And so even though they may graph similar-ish, the degree, the change is pretty drastic. It is quite a warm IEM, definitely one of the more warmer IEMs I have. And I've noticed that everywhere on Discord, everywhere, and on Reddit, they're like, yeah, this is a warm IEM. So it may seem close-ish to the Tantrum Origin. It's quite a bit warmer than the Tantrum Origin. Another thing I want to talk about is sometimes things will obviously map similar, and they are pretty much the same. The Tantrum Fola and the Tantrum Nora, they graph pretty much the same. And this lets me know, like, this, you save yourself money. Like, you don't need to buy this. This is because, I've actually did test these out. These were pretty much the same, and these were redundant. The Juicier Defiant and the Juicier Nebula. Now, I haven't bought the Nebula, but these look pretty redundant. So I feel like I don't need to really, like, look at these mids. They're like so similar, provided that the graphs are, correct. This is another information here, right? So this is the Crin Ear reference compared to the EPZ 550. Now, you have to understand the EPZ 550 is like $500 something, right? So if you already have the reference, what kind of information am I getting here? It looks like basically it's less bass compared to the reference, which in my opinion would make me sad, because the reference I felt like had just barely like on the cusp of good bass, but to have even less than that, I would be pretty upset about that. Now, look at this. The mids are pretty much identical, I feel like. You're pretty much, and to my understanding, I believe they are the same shell, but one is open and one is closed, right? But here, there's a massive difference here. So here, obviously, the 550 is tilting a lot brighter. I don't think I would like this, right? So that's why, even though some folks are telling me, like, can you review the EPZ 550? I don't buy it because I don't want to pay $500 for something I think is going to sound worse than the reference for me. Like, that's not something I would want to get. But again, I'm kind of showing you, like, this is all common sense per se, maybe, but this is like showing you, this is how you save money, right? You realize I have this IEM, I have the reference, and I'm looking at here, someone else might like this. Someone else might want a much brighter reference. I don't care for this. So I know for me, I could pass on this, right? And kind of going on that notion, this also lets me know about my own preferences, right? So I really like the Kiwi Ear Astral, and I like the Software Studio 4. This is wild. Look at this. Look at how close this is, like, from here to here. Like, there's something here that I really like. And remember I was telling you about how I don't like the carved out vocals? This doesn't do that. It's like right there. There's something, it's got a little bit of meat to it, right? This is another one. Look at the, not this one, sorry. When you look at this, this is the Sibga Q. Look at this, that line, right? This is the Harman 2019 line. Look at how much above that it just has a little bit more of that, a little bit more meat in here, right? And one of my favorite IEMs is obviously the Civic Q. I really like the vocals on this IEM. Okay, so that being said, I do want to pose a theory as to something, and I'm wondering whether this is the case. So I was asking around, and I was saying, hey, I'm looking to buy a coupler so that I can measure IEMs. And I was asking some folks, what do you guys recommend? And the funny thing is that it really came down to only 3 options. And in many ways, all 3 options seem like... So the first option is to buy some rig that's $50,000. Well, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not that dedicated to it. The second is something called the Mini Pro DSP or whatever, but nobody else has it. So I feel like I don't want to get something that nobody else has, because then there's no sense of correlation, right? But then the third thing, but it was telling, and they say everybody has this. They're like, just go on AliExpress and buy this cheapo beepo sort of coupler here you can get for like $100 or something, and this will get everything done. And it's making me wonder, maybe that's where the problem is. Maybe the problem is that these tools are not accurate enough, and they're just so cheap, and this is what everybody else is using, and this is what everybody else is using the graph, and a lot of the information here is just not quite up to par. But the tools that are more precise, are not available to the masses in terms of affordability. You know what I mean? That's kind of like my theory regarding that, and that's why I always feel like I'm a little bit at edge with some of the some of the graphs that are out there. I just feel like that's not accurate. You know what I mean? But and then maybe it comes down to the tools being used, right? So, but overall, when it comes to EQ, I really do feel like when it comes to EQ, it's a hint, it's a tell. It's kind of like, when you're adding like a bunch to the bass and you're to the IEM, that's letting you know like that's actually what you want. Or when you're actually trying to do something to make sure that the vocals sound a lot better, they're fuller, and you're actually looking for an IEM like that. There actually is an IEM that exists that is closer to that, right? Or when you're looking to crank up all the soundstage and technicals and things like that, and you want more of this, it's a hint. It's a tell. It's telling you like there's something else. It's telling you need to get something else. You know what I mean? Now, that being said, I think most people look at EQ as like, no, I'm looking at this to solve the problem permanently, and that's it. And that's perfectly fine. But the way I look at it is, no, it's actually telling you need to get something else. You know what I mean? And what happens is once you get something closer to, what you want, then you're closer to the finish line, and there's less EQ that you need to do because it's way, way closer to what you want to get. In other words, if you're looking for something with a lot of bass and you're EQing a ton of bass, you may find you're going to get a lot closer to what you want if you find an IEM that's like that. Or if you like IEMs and you're all about vocals, and you want like nice and full and lush vocals, and you can have a better starting point when you actually look for the IEMs that do that. So anyway, yeah, that's all I want to say here.